This is the story of Ayanfe, a woman whose trust became her greatest wound and whose silence became her greatest weapon. But why would a best friend betray the one who loved her like a sister? What darkness hides behind a caring smile? Let's uncover the truth in this powerful tale of betrayal, karma, and dignity. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you're new here, kindly subscribe and join us for unforgettable stories filled with lessons, wisdom, and eye-opening experiences. Let's get started. The fever came like wildfire in the night. Ayanfe's body burned hot enough to make the bedsheets damp with sweat. Her skin glistened under the dim glow of the palm oil lamp, and her breathing came in shallow gasps that frightened even the crickets into silence. Her husband Kunle paced the small room, wringing his hands, his face tight with worry. He had sent for the herbalist, but the old man lived 3 villages away. It was Morunke who sat beside the bed, holding Ayanfe's trembling hand, whispering comfort into her ear. "I'm here, my sister. I won't leave you." Her voice was honey and a rain, soft as a mother's lullaby. Kunle watched from the doorway, helpless, grateful his wife had such a faithful friend. As dawn approached, Ayanfe finally drifted into restless sleep. But just before darkness claimed her completely, she heard it. A drumbeat, distant, ancient, calling from somewhere deep in the forest. And Morunke's grip on her hand tightened, not with love, but with something cold and claiming, something that felt like ownership. When the moon climbed high and the village fell into silence, Morunke rose from Ayanfe's bedside. She moved like smoke through the narrow corridor, her wrapper dragging softly against the mud floor. Her shadow stretched long and thin against the walls. She paused at Kunle's door, her hand hovering over the wooden frame. No knock, no hesitation. She entered as though the room had always belonged to her, as though she had every right to be there. Kunle sat on the edge of his mat, head in his hands, shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt he had been carrying for weeks. He looked up when she came in, and guilt already pooled in his eyes like water in a broken pot. Morunke knelt before him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a familiarity that spoke of many nights before this one. "She will never know," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear like a serpent's kiss. Her breath was warm, her words were poison, and in that moment, the betrayal that had been building in secret bloomed fully in the dark, ugly and complete. Outside, the night birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as though the earth itself knew something sacred had been broken. Long before that night, when they were still children, running barefoot through cassava farms and splashing in the stream, Morunke was always second. Second in beauty, though she was pretty in her own way. Second in the teacher's praise, though she worked just as hard. Second in the eyes of the boys who brought ripe mangoes to the girls they admired. Ayanfe was the sun, bright and warm, drawing everyone into her orbit. Morunke was the shadow it cast, always present but rarely noticed. She learned to smile through the sting of being overlooked. She learned to clap when Ayanfe won the dancing competition at harvest time. She learned to laugh when the village boys compared them and chose Ayanfe every time. But seeds of envy do not need water to grow. They feed on silence. They feast on comparison. When Kunle, the blacksmith's strong and kind son, with eyes like polished stone, chose Ayanfe over her, something inside Morunke cracked like dry clay under the harmattan sun. She stood at the edge of the wedding ceremony, smiling brightly, clapping loudest, ululating with the other women. But her heart whispered a single vow that day, dark and binding. One day, what is hers will be mine. Ayanfe recovered slowly from the fever, but the house felt different when she finally rose from her sickbed. The air hung heavy, thick and close, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. The morning light seemed dimmer. The compound felt smaller. Kunle no longer met her eyes at breakfast, his gaze sliding away whenever she looked at him. His hands trembled when he passed her the water calabash. Morunke stayed longer each day, always finding reasons not to return to her own home. She helped with cooking, with sweeping, with washing clothes in the stream, always hovering close, always watching, always smiling that patient, gentle smile. "You are still weak, sister. Let me do it," she would say, taking the broom from Ayanfe's hands. "You need to rest and regain your strength." But at night, when the compound settled into darkness, Ayanfe would awake to sounds she couldn't name. Laughter, low and intimate, drifting through the thin walls. Whispers that stopped the moment she stirred. She would lie still, heart pounding like a trapped bird, listening to the silence that followed, heavy and accusing. Once, she rose and walked barefoot to Kunle's door. Her hand touched the rough wood, ready to push it open, but fear, or perhaps instinct, pulled her back like an invisible rope around her waist. She returned to her bed and stared at the ceiling until morning came, counting the cracks in the mud plaster. The dream came on the 7th night after her recovery. Ayanfe stood beside a wide river that flowed backward, its waters climbing upstream against all nature and reason. The sky was red, the color of clay mixed with blood, and the air tasted of copper and ash. A woman stood on the opposite bank, tall and still, her face hidden beneath a veil of Ayanfe's own wrapper, the blue one with yellow birds that her mother had given her on her wedding day. She wore Ayanfe's coral beads around her neck. She walked with Ayanfe's gait, that slight sway of the hips that Kunle used to say reminded him of palm trees in the wind. Slowly, deliberately, she began to cross the river, stepping on stones that appeared beneath her feet with each step, as though the river itself was helping her reach the other side. When she reached the middle, she stopped and turned. Though her face remained hidden behind the veil, her voice was clear as breaking glass, sharp enough to cut. "You are sleeping with your enemy," she said, each word falling like a stone into still water. Ayanfe walked gasping, drenched in sweat, her heart a wild drum in her chest. The rooster had not yet crowed. Darkness still pressed against the window, but she knew, deep in her bones, that the dream was not just a dream, it was a warning. After the dream, Moronke became even kinder if such a thing was possible. She bathed Ayanfe with warm water scented with herbs and flowers, pouring it gently over her shoulders while humming old songs. She plaited her hair in intricate patterns that took hours to complete, her fingers patient and gentle, never pulling too hard. She cooked Ayanfe's favorite meals without being asked: fried yam with pepper sauce, beans cooked until soft, ripe plantains caramelized in palm oil. She called her my sister, my heart, my twin, and spoke of their childhood as though those days had been golden and perfect. Ayanfe wanted to believe it. She needed to believe it. Loneliness makes us blind to danger, and Ayanfe had no other close friends in the village besides Moronke. Their mothers were friends. They had grown up together. Surely that counted for something. One afternoon, while Ayanfe slept deeply from exhaustion, Moronke knelt beside Kunle in the backyard where he was sharpening his tools. From a small leather pouch tied to her waist, she pulled a red thread, thin as a spider's silk, shimmering faintly in the sunlight. She whispered words in a language older than the village, older than the farms, older than mothers taught her, a woman who lived where the forest met the swamp, a woman whose face was always in shadow. Then she tied the thread around Kunle's wrist, knotting it 3 times, pulling it tight. He flinched but did not pull away, his resistance already worn down by weeks of secret meetings and stolen moments. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She smiled, her eyes bright with something not quite love. "Protection," she lied smoothly, "to keep you safe from evil spirits." But they both knew it was something else entirely. It was a binding, a claim, a chain made of thread and darkness. The old woman appeared at the market on a day thick with heat. The sun pressed down like a heavy hand, and the air shimmered over the dusty ground. Ayanfe was buying yams, inspecting them for soft spots, when the elder's bony hand gripped her waist with surprising strength. The woman's eyes were clouded with age, milk white with cataracts, but her voice was sharp as a fresh blade. "Some friendships drink blood quietly, child," she said, her breath smelling of bitter herbs and smoke. Ayanfe froze, the yam still in her hand. "What do you mean, Mama?" she asked, her voice catching in her throat. The woman tilted her head, as though listening to voices Ayanfe could not hear, voices carried on a wind that wasn't blowing. "There is a place," she said slowly, her words deliberate and careful, "deep in the forest where the old trees grow. They call it the Forest of Echoes. It speaks what is hidden. It repeats what is whispered in the dark. What is said in secret rooms, the forest knows. What is done behind closed doors, the forest remembers." Ayanfe's throat tightened. Her palms grew damp. "Why are you telling me this, Mama? Why me?" The old woman released her wrist and turned away, her wrapper swaying as she moved. "Because truth is kinder than ignorance, even when it cuts. Go to the forest if you dare to know. But be warned, child, some truths change everything." Then she disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ayanfe alone, trembling, the yam forgotten at her feet. 3 days later, after sleepless nights and endless doubt, Ayanfe entered the Forest of Echoes. The trees grew so close their branches wove a roof that blocked the sun, creating a twilight world even at midday. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of moss and old rain, of earth and decay and life all mixed together. Ferns grew thick on the forest floor, and vines hung like curtains between the ancient trunks. Every step she took was followed by another sound. Her own footsteps repeated back to her, but slower, heavier, as though invisible feet were following just behind. The sound of her breathing echoed. The rustle of her wrapper whispered back. Then came the voices. Whispers layered upon whispers, like many people speaking at once, but softly, so softly she had to strain to hear. Some were her own words, spoken weeks ago. "I trust you completely, my sister." Others belong to Kunle. "I don't deserve her." And some, soft and venomous, belong to Moruke. "She will never know. She is too trusting, too simple. She is blind, and I am grateful for it. He is mine now." Ayafe's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She pressed her hand against a tree to steady herself, its bark rough and real beneath her palm. Her vision swam, her chest felt tight, and then from somewhere deep within the forest, beyond where her eyes could see, a river began to speak her name, Ayanfe. Over and over, "Ayanfe, come." She followed the sound, stumbling, tears already streaming down her face. The truth she had been avoiding was finally catching up to her. The River-Seer lived where the water split into 3 paths, each flowing in a different direction, as though the river itself couldn't decide where it wanted to go. She was ancient, older than anyone Ayanfe had ever seen, her skin like bark, weathered and lined with 1,000 stories. Her hair was white as cotton, wild and unbound, flowing down her back like a waterfall. She wore no beads, no ornaments, only a simple wrapper the color of mud and water. She did not ask why Ayanfe had come. She did not ask her name. She simply gestured with one gnarled hand for her to sit on the smooth stone beside the river. Ayanfe sat, her body trembling, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The seer dipped her hands into the river, and the water began to glow faintly, like captured moonlight, silver and ethereal. Images formed on the surface, shimmering and clear, as though she were looking through a window. Moruke and Kunle, tangled in betrayal, their bodies pressed together in the darkness of his room. Moruke's hands weaving charms in the dark, tying knots in red thread, whispering words that made the air around her ripple. Kunle's weakness, his shame, his silence, all laid bare in the water. Ayanfe's tears fell into the river, each one creating ripples that spread outward, but the images did not fade. They remained accusing and true. "What do I do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How do I live with this knowing?" The seer's voice was like wind through dry leaves, ancient and wise. "Confront her and you will lose everything. The village will turn on you. They will call you jealous, bitter, a woman who cannot keep her husband. Stay silent and you will lose yourself. The anger will eat you from the inside." Ayanfe looked up, confused, her face wet with tears. "Then what? What choice do I have?" The seer smiled sadly, her eyes full of a sorrow that came from seeing too many broken women. "The third path, child, the one few women take." "What path?" "The path of dignity, the path where you walk away." Ayanfe chose silence. Not because she was weak, not because she was afraid, but because she was wise enough to know that confrontation was not always victory. She returned to the village with her heart a stone and her face a mask, revealing nothing. She watched, she listened, she waited. She moved through her days like a woman in a dream, going through the motions of life while her mind planned and calculated. Moruke noticed nothing. She continued her kindness, her smiles, her whispered assurances. She brought Ayanfe fruit from the market. She sat with her in the evenings, telling stories and laughing. "I will always be here for you, sister," she said one evening, braiding her hair with gentle hands. "You and I, we are bound together. Nothing can separate us." Ayanfe stared at the wall, her jaw tight, her hands clenched in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I know," she replied softly, each word carefully controlled. That night, Moruke made an announcement at dinner. Kunle was there, Ayanfe was there, and the air between them was thick with unspoken things. "I've decided," Moruke said brightly, her smile wide and warm, looking between them with eyes that sparkled with false innocence. "I will never leave this house. You are my family now, my only family. Where else would I go?" Kunle looked away quickly, guilt written in every line of his face. Ayanfe nodded slowly, her expression giving nothing away. And in her chest, something cold and sharp began to form, harder than iron, sharper than any blade. Patience, the deadliest weapon of all. She would wait, she would watch, and when the time came, she would act. But on her terms, not theirs. Moruke's hunger grew with each passing day. The stolen nights were no longer satisfying the craving that gnawed at her constantly. The charms she had used, the red thread and whispered words were losing their power. She wanted more than borrowed moments in the dark. She wanted Ayanfe's place completely, her name, her position, her husband, her home. She wanted to erase Ayanfe entirely and step into her life like putting on a new wrapper. She returned to the woman in the swamp, the one who dealt in shadows and old curses, the one whose heart sat on stilts above black water that never reflected the sky. "I need something stronger," she said, her voice urgent, desperate. "The old charms are fading. I need something permanent." The woman's smile was gap-teeth and knowing, her eyes bright with a hunger of her own. "Stronger magic requires stronger payment," she said, her voice like gravel grinding. She handed Moruke a clay pot sealed with wax, small enough to fit in her palm, but heavy, so heavy it felt like it contained something alive. "Bury this beneath her sleeping mat when the moon is new. But know this, the charm will demand blood before the full moon rises." Moruke's hands trembled as she took the pot, its surface rough and cold. "Whose blood?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman's eyes gleamed in the darkness of the hut. "It will choose," she said simply. "The charm knows who has sinned. It knows who owes a debt. It will take what it is owed." That night, while Ayanfe slept, Moruke crept into her room and buried the pot beneath her mat, pressing it deep into the earth floor. And in the darkness, something old and hungry stirred awake, stretching invisible fingers toward the beating heart in the house, deciding which one to claim. Kunle began to feel it first, a weight pressing on his chest at night, making it hard to breathe, as though someone was sitting on him, invisible and heavy. Dreams came where he was drowning in black water, pulled under from both sides, two women's hands around his ankles, dragging him down. He would wake, gasping, his body slick with sweat, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Guilt gnawed at him like termite in wood, eating away at his peace from the inside. He avoided Ayafe's eyes during meals. He flinched when Moruke touched him, her hands now feeling like brands burning his skin. But he said nothing. Cowardice has no voice, only excuses. One night, he dreamed he stood in the village square at high noon, the sun beating down, the entire village gathered around him. Ayanfe stood on his right, silent and still. Moruke stood on his left, smiling. Both were watching him with eyes that saw everything, every lie, every betrayal, every stolen moment. He tried to speak, to explain, to beg forgiveness, to make them understand. But when he opened his mouth, only water poured out, black and foul, filling his mouth, choking him, drowning him where he stood. He woke choking, alone in the dark, trapped in a prison of his own. And he knew, though he would not admit it, that he deserved whatever was coming for him. The moon festival was approaching and the village buzzed with preparations. It was the most sacred night of the year, when the ancestors were set to walk among the living, when the boundary between the spirit world and the physical world grew thin as spider silk, when all lives were dragged into the light, whether the liars wanted it or not. Women began sewing new wrappers, men repaired the drums, children practiced the old songs their grandmothers taught them. The elders moved through the village, reminding everyone of the festival's power. On this night, truth is a living thing, they said, their voices grave. It cannot be hidden, it cannot be denied. What is buried will rise, what is whispered will be shouted. The ancestors see all. Moruke heard this and felt a flicker of unease crawl up her spine like a cold hand. But her hunger was stronger than her fear. Her desire was louder than her caution. She made plans for a final ritual by the river, one that would bind Kunle to her forever and erase Ayanfe from his heart completely, permanently, irrevocably. She gathered the items she would need: a lock of Kunle's hair stolen from his mat while he slept, a piece of Ayanfe's cloth cut from the hem of her favorite wrapper, 7 river stones smooth and black, and a blade sharper than regret, its edge honed until it could split a hair. The full moon was 3 nights away. She had to work quickly. On the night before the festival, when the moon hung fat and silver in the sky, Moruke slipped out of the house like a thief. The village was asleep, every compound dark and quiet. She carried her bundle to the riverbank where the water ran dark and deep, where the current whispered secrets to the stones. She knelt on the mud, her wrapper soaking in the damp earth, and began the ritual. Her lips moved constantly, whispering words that made the air grow cold, words that had no business being spoken by human tongues. She burnt the piece of Ayanfe's cloth, and the smoke rose black and thick, smelling of sulfur and ash. She buried Kunle's hair beneath a stone, pressing it deep into the mud. She arranged the 7 black stones in a circle around her. Then, with the blade, she cut her palm, hissing at the sharp pain. She let 3 drops of blood fall into the river, counting them carefully. 1, 2, 3. The water hissed where each drop touched it, like hot oil in a pan. Then, slowly, impossibly, the river began to change. Its surface turned black, not with mud, but with something thicker, something wrong. The color of old blood, of rot, of things that should stay buried. The frogs stopped croaking. The crickets fell silent. Even the wind died. Moruke smiled, believing she had won, believing her power was complete. But the river had accepted her offering, and rivers always demand payment. Always. They never forget, they never forgive. The next morning, Moruke woke feeling strange. Something was wrong, though she couldn't name it at first. She went to wash her face in the basin of water she kept beside her sleeping mat. But when she looked down into the water, there was no reflection staring back at her. She gasped and checked again, moving her head, waving her hand over the water. Nothing. Just water. Just emptiness. She ran to the bronze mirror Ayanfe kept by the window in the main room. Again, nothing. The mirror showed the room behind her, the wall, the window, but where her face should have been was only empty space, as though she had become invisible, erased. Panic clawed at her chest like a wild animal. She touched her face, her arms, pinching her skin hard enough to bruise. She was solid, real, flesh and blood and bone, but the world no longer saw her the same way. Something had been taken from her in the night. That evening, when she spoke, her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Flatter, hollow, like an echo of an echo, like a recording played too many times until the sound degraded. Kule noticed during dinner. "Are you unwell?" he asked, frowning at her. "Your voice sounds different." She tried to smile, tried to be reassuring. "I'm fine, just tired." But even her smile felt wrong, as though it no longer belonged to her face, as though her own expressions had become a mask that didn't fit quite right. The river had taken something from her in exchange for the ritual. Her reflection, her true voice, pieces of her humanity. And it would not give them back. The payment had begun. The moon festival arrived with drum beats that seemed to come from the earth itself, deep and resonant, shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. The entire village gathered in the square as the sun set, dressed in white, their faces painted with sacred chalk in patterns that told stories. The great drum sat at the center of the gathering, ancient and powerful, its skin stretched tight over wood older than anyone's grandmother's grandmother, wood that had seen countless festivals, countless revelations. No one touched it yet. The drummer stood nearby, waiting. The elder said it would beat when the ancestors were ready, when the spirits had descended and were ready to speak. As the moon rose full and silver, casting everything in pale light, the drum began to sound. Boom. Boom, boom. But no hand touched it. No one stood near it. It beat on its own, the sound echoing across the village, impossible to ignore. The villagers gasped. Children pressed close to their mothers. Men straightened their backs. The elders nodded solemnly, not unsurprised. The ancestors are here, they said, their voices ringing clear. Tonight truth will walk among us. Tonight what is hidden will be revealed. Moroke stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She tried to back away, to slip into the shadows, but her legs wouldn't obey. The crowd began to dance, moving in the old patterns, but Moroke stood frozen. And then, without warning, her legs gave out. She collapsed mid-movement, her body seizing, as though something invisible had gripped her throat and was shaking her like a rag doll. The crowd circled around her immediately, the dancing stopping. Ayanfe pushed through, her face calm, but her eyes bright with knowing, bright with a fire that had been building for weeks. Moronke's body jerked on the ground, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Then words poured out, loud and clear, cutting through the night like a blade through flesh. I slept with Kunle, her voice magnified somehow, carrying to every corner of the square. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mothers covered their children's ears. Men straightened their backs. I tied charms to keep him bound. I buried curses beneath her mat to make her weak. I wanted her life. I wanted her husband. I wanted her home. I wanted everything that was hers. Tears streamed down her face, but the words would not stop, could not stop. The ancestors were speaking through her now, using her mouth to drag every hidden sin into the light, every secret whispered in darkness, now shouted under the moon. I have lied to her face while stealing from her bed. I have called her sister while betraying her in every way possible. I have smiled at her while wishing her dead. The crowd murmured, shocked, horrified. The elders' faces were stone. Kunle stood frozen at the back of the gathering, his face ashen, his hands trembling. The villagers turned to him, their eyes hard as stone, sharp as accusation. And then, slowly, his legs buckled. He fell to his knees, his head bowed, unable to meet anyone's gaze. His shame was complete, public, irreversible. Kunle's voice cracked as he spoke, barely audible at first. "It's true," he said, and the crowd fell silent to hear him. "It's all true. I betrayed my wife. I betrayed my home. I betrayed the ancestors. I am not the man I believed I was. I am not the man my father raised me to be." His hand trembled in the dust, his fingers digging into the earth, as though trying to anchor himself. "I was weak. I let temptation into my heart. I let pride and cowardice guide me when I should have been guided by honor." The crowd murmured, some with pity, most with disgust and anger. The elders shook their heads slowly. A man who betrays his wife betrays the ancestors themselves, violates the sacred bond that holds families and villages together. Kunle looked up at Ayanfe, his eyes red and desperate, filled with a grief that came too late. "Forgive me," he begged, his voice breaking. "Please, my wife, I will spend the rest of my life making this right. I will do anything, please." But Ayanfe did not move. She stood tall, her wrapper wrapped tight around her waist, her head held high, her spine straight as an iron rod. She looked like a queen, like a warrior, like something carved from stone and faith. The entire village held its breath, waiting to see what the wronged woman would do. Would she forgive? Would she rage? Would she crumble? And then, slowly, deliberately, Ayanfe stepped forward, into the center of the circle, into the light of the fire, where everyone could see her clearly. She looked down at Kunle, her face unreadable, calm as still water. For a long moment, she said nothing, letting the silence stretch and deepen. Then she spoke, and her voice was steady as stone, clear as a bell. "I forgive you," she said, and the crowd stirred in surprise. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Because carrying hatred is like carrying fire in my bare hands. It would burn me, not you." Kunle's face crumpled with hope, but she raised her hand, stopping him before he could speak. "But forgiveness does not mean I will stay. Forgiveness does not mean I will forget. Forgiveness does not mean you get to keep me." She turned to the elders, addressing them directly, her voice ringing across the square. "I am leaving this village. I will not live in a home built on lies. I will not sleep in a bed contaminated by betrayal. I will not raise children in a house where respect died." Kunle reached for her, desperation in every movement, but she stepped back, out of his reach. "You made your choice," she said quietly, looking at him one last time. "Now I make mine." Without another word, Ayanfe walked through the crowd. No one stopped her. No one tried. They parted before her like water before a stone. Monoke, still on the ground, reached out weakly with one trembling hand. "Sister, please," she whispered, her voice broken. But Ayanfe did not look back. She walked past the drums, past the fires, past the life she had known, her head high, her steps sure, and she did not stop, not once. In the days that followed, Moruke's punishment came not from the elders, not from any official decree, but from the village itself. The collective judgment was swift and merciless. No one would speak to her when she walked through the market. Conversations stopped when she approached. Mothers pulled their children away when she passed, whispering warnings. "Don't look at her. Don't touch her. She is cursed." The market women turned their backs when she tried to buy food, refusing her money. Even the dogs would not come near her, growling and backing away. Her beauty, once her pride, the thing she had counted on to carry her through life, began to fade rapidly. Her skin grew dull and ashen. Dark circles appeared beneath her eyes. Her hair lost its shine and began to thin. Her voice, already hollow, became a rasp, painful to hear. She wandered to the riverbank often, sometimes standing there for hours, calling Ayafe's name into the water, begging for forgiveness that would never come. "Sister, Ayanfe, please!" But the river did not answer. It had taken what it wanted from her. Her reflection, her voice, her beauty, her place in the world, everything that made her who she was. Kunle, shamed and broken, unable to meet anyone's eyes, left the village soon after the festival. He packed his few belongings in the dark of night and disappeared before dawn. No one knew where he went. Some said he became a wanderer, working odd jobs in distant villages where no one knew his name or his shame. Others said he died of guilt, his heart simply giving out under the weight of what he had done. Either way, he was forgotten. His name became a warning. His story became a lesson. Ayanfe walked for days after leaving the village, her feet carrying her down dusty roads she had never traveled before. She slept beneath trees, their branches her only shelter. She ate fruits from the roadside, oranges and mangoes when she could find them, and drank from streams when she was thirsty. She spoke to no one, keeping her eyes forward, her mind focused on putting distance between herself and everything she had known. She passed through villages where no one knew her name or her shame, where she was just another woman traveling. And in that anonymity, in that blessed invisibility, she began to breathe again. The tightness in her chest began to ease. She found work in a distant town, helping a cloth merchant dye fabrics in great vats of indigo and red. Her hands, once soft, became strong and capable, stained with the colors of her labor. Her heart, once shattered into pieces she thought could never be mended, began to heal in quiet ways. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like skin growing back over a wound. She did not speak of her past. She did not seek revenge. She did not spend her nights plotting or crying or wishing harm on those who had harmed her. She simply lived. One evening, as she stirred a pot of dye, the merchant's wife came to stand beside her. "You carry pain," the woman said softly, observantly. "I can see it in your eyes, but you do not let it carry you. That is rare. Most people let their pain become their identity." Ayanfe smiled faintly, the first real smile in months. "Pain is a teacher," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I will not let it be my master. I will learn from it, and then I will set it down." Months passed, then a year, and slowly, carefully, like building a house one brick at a time, Ayanfe built a life she could be proud of. She eventually settled by a river in a town where the sun set over water like molten gold, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink every evening. She built a small house with her own hands, its walls strong and straight, its roof tight against rain, its floor swept clean every morning. She grew vegetables in a small garden behind the house: tomatoes, peppers, okra, leafy greens. She wove baskets from river reeds and sold them in the market on market days. She lived simply, but with dignity and purpose. The townspeople came to respect her, though they knew nothing of her past. They did not know her story, but they saw her strength. They saw how she carried herself. They saw how she helped neighbors without being asked, how she shared her harvest when others had little, how she never spoke ill of anyone. One day, a traveling trader brought news from her old village. "There is a woman there," he said, "sitting in the market square telling stories to anyone who would listen, who wanders like a ghost. They say she betrayed her best friend, and now the ancestors have cursed her. She has no reflection, no voice, no beauty. She is a warning to all who would break sacred bonds." Ayanfe listened quietly from her stall, her hands continuing to weave, not missing a beat. "And the husband?" she asked calmly. The trader shrugged, his face indifferent. "Gone. Disappeared. No one speaks of him. It's as though he never existed." Ayanfe nodded slowly, her expression neutral. She felt no joy in their suffering, no satisfaction in their downfall, only a quiet, distant sadness, the way one feels when hearing about a storm that destroyed a village far away. That chapter of her life was closed now, sealed, finished.